Today we're going to talk about annotated bibliographies. Annotated bibliographies are oftentimes done before you start a research essay. They are used to help you compile your sources, cite your sources, and also explain and justify why you are using certain sources. Your instructor may give you specifics of what they want you to use for your annotated bibliography. They may also just tell you to write annotations. The two most important parts of the annotated bibliography are the citation and the annotation. Makes sense if the name is annotated bibliography. So let's talk about a little bit about what those words mean. Annotated bibliography, when you're annotating it, that means to make notes of something. In this case, for the annotated bibliography, what you're doing is you're writing a short summary of the article. You're proving that to your professor that you've read it. The bibliography part, that's another word for a citation. Now, as I talk about the annotated bibliography in this particular video, I'm going to talk about it in MLA. That's the Modern Language Association. And that's the type of citation form I will use. If your instructor wants you to use APA or Chicago, Surabian, whatever the correct format is for the class you're in, you make sure to use those and make sure that you do research on the specific type of citation that you're going to be using. Okay. When I teach annotated bibliographies in my class, I have my students use a specific format and I have them do it in a list. As you become more advanced, you may not have to break it into a list, but a list can help you make sure you've got all of the parts that you need. So this is going to be the template that I give my students. It has 7 different parts. It's got the MLA citation, applicability, genre, author's evidence, author/publisher credibility, timeliness, and annotation. So this template, it's got 6 different sources. I have my students do 6 sources to start off with. It just kind of depends on the length of your research essay and what your professor wants to do. They'll kind of help you decide how many sources to include in your annotated bibliography. Okay, let's talk about what these different terms mean though. Number 1, we start off with the MLA citation. So in that MLA citation, kind of the basic things that you want to include the author's name, the title of whatever the item is. It might be an article, it could be a video, whatever. Then you're going to make sure you include the first container information. That's wherever you found that article. Maybe it's a database or a magazine or a textbook. And you're also going to include information about the second container. So that kind of gives you a basic idea of what you need. It doesn't go into all the details, but that's primarily what you're going to use for that MLA citation. Number 2, applicability. So if something is applicable, that means how does it relate? How is it relevant? How is it used? So this is asking, how are you, the writer, going to use this article in your essay? What are you going to do with it? You could put specific quotes in here if you want, but you don't want it to be every single quote you're going to use if you're going to use 10 quotes. The annotated bibliography, each entry, it shouldn't be 5 pages long. It should be probably a paragraph, maybe a full page depending on what your instructor wants. Okay, so how are you going to use that source? How do you think you will use it? Sometimes if you're still going through your sources, you may not quite know how you're going to use it just yet, so you could skip this and come back to that. That's perfectly fine. Number 3, genre. Genre is the type of text or maybe even the type of media that you're going to be using. So is it an article? Is it an essay? Is it a video? Is it a film? A documentary? Whatever it is, you need to put that genre down. Most of the time, the genres that my students use for college level writing is going to be news articles. That would be like USA Today, New York Times. Scholarly journal articles, peer-reviewed articles. Okay, so scholarly journal articles, a lot of times they're peer-reviewed, but not always. Those are going to be articles written by scholars, and they're experts in that field. They know about it, they've studied, they've worked in that field. Peer-reviewed is going to be, kind of the most credible article that you can get. It's a scholarly article. It's someone who has written in that field probably before. They've studied it. They've worked in that field. And also their peers have read through that article that they wrote. And they've said, yes, but, their findings are valid and what they've written is valid. So it's got an extra layer of credibility. Okay, so that's two common ones for genre. Next, we've got the author's evidence. What kind of evidence does the author use? The reason we want to look at this is because it tells us a little bit about the author's credibility. Did they use other sources? Did they cite those sources? Did they use other sources, but mostly paraphrase and then didn't list those sources at the end? Okay, so, talk about some of that evidence that they use. The next part is the author-publisher credibility. You first want to start with the author. If the author has credibility and you can find information on them, you want to make sure you include that here. Now, sometimes you can't find information about the author in the text, or, even with doing a little bit of a search online, you can't find it. In that case, go up to the publisher, okay? Maybe you don't know this particular writer who's writing for the Washington Post, but you do know that the Washington Post is a fairly credible source, so you can use that to kind of build the credibility of this source. Next is timeliness, so it's got that time in it. It's telling us, is this article timely for today? Was it written in the last 5 years, 10 years, last 25 years? Okay. Now, there are some research topics that it is vital that that article have been written in the last year, maybe the last 6 months, the last 5 years, okay? Especially things in science. Science is rapidly changing. There are some things where the timeliness does not matter as much, okay? It can depend on the topic. It might be, for example, a principle in education that educators have been following for the last 10 years or the last 20 years, okay? And then the third part about timeliness is maybe the article isn't the most timely, but for what you're planning on using it for, it's not necessary for it to be timely, okay? So I had a student who was writing about abortion, and she wanted to talk about some of the Roe v. Wade, and she had an older source about Roe v. Wade, and that's fine. I had another student who wanted a definition from an older book. That's fine, as long as the definition hadn't changed now. Okay, so you can justify some timeliness, but think about the type of topic that you've chosen, and then make sure you're not doing too many untimely articles. Okay, 1 or 2 is okay, but all of them, sometimes that's questionable. And then last, we have our annotation. As I mentioned earlier, to annotate something is to make notes on it. Okay, and for the annotated bibliography, you're making notes of what the text is about. The reason why you want to have this is because during your research process, you're going to go through so many different sources, and it's going to be hard to keep track of all of them. So you want to make sure you've got a summary of each source that you're planning on using, so you can remember, oh yeah, that's the one that used this quote that I want to use in my 3rd paragraph. Okay, so that's where that annotation part comes in. It's really a summary. My students typically write 3 to 4 sentences, but some instructors, they want that annotation to be longer, and some of these, 2 through 6, they want them to be a little bit shorter. Maybe they don't include all of these things, all right? You always want to follow what your instructor wants, okay? They're the one that gives you the grade. This video is a good, building block, and that's, I teach annotated bibliography in Composition 1 because that's what Composition 1 is designed to do. Comp 1 is for supporting your work in other classes. So it gives you a nice building block, but, don't be afraid to make a few changes as, to fit your classes and your instructors. Now we're going to take a look at 2 examples of annotated bibliographies. The one on the top is going to be the list form, the one that I use for my class. And the one down here is a paragraph form. This one might be a little bit long. Some instructors might prefer longer, but you'll get the idea from it, okay? Much of the content is the same. It's just a matter of, what form is preferred, okay? So first we've got the MLA citation. Okay, here we've got our author and title of the text. And then this is the information about the first container. It doesn't have a second container. So I don't have a second container in that MLA citation. Applicability. It says, this essay gives personal experience that relates to my topic, real education. Also, this essay provides a definition of real education, which I can use in my own essay. I would like to use this essay to find evidence of the idea that students should study something they're interested in regardless of the pay. I will also use Edmondson's anecdote with his father to support my argument that students should choose majors based on their interests rather than the pay for a job in that field. Edmondson writes, my father told me that I was going to go to college only once and that while I was there, I had better study what I wanted. Page 406. I try to include the in-text citations if I have any quotes in here so that I don't have to go back to the book or the article to find what page it was on. It's already written right here for me, and I can pull straight from here and put that in my essay. All right, number 3. Edmondson's work is an essay which was originally published in his book Why Teach in Defense of Real Education, but the essay has been edited and republished in the textbook From Inquiry to Academic Writing, a Text and a Reader. So here we've got the genre, the essay, but it also tells us a little bit more about what kinds of containers it was in. That's a little bit of the genre too. Author's evidence. Edmondson uses anecdotes about his college major and his father to prove his point that students should study what they are interested in. In addition, Edmondson quotes and references both Ralph Waldo Emerson and Sigmund Freud as canonical authority figures to explain and back up his argument that studying different subjects is about students finding what applies to them and what they can take from those subjects and use. Okay, so here's the evidence, the anecdotes, what kind of anecdotes, just more information, and then here's what it does. Okay, that's some good explanation in there to prove his point. Down here we've got the same thing. Here's some authors, some really famous people, they're authority figures. He uses them to explain and back up his argument. So why did he use that evidence? How did he use it? Number 5, the author-publisher credibility. Mark Edmondson is an award-winning professor at a well-known large university, the University of Virginia. So I pointed out that this was a big university because, that can give him a little bit more credibility. He works in a bigger department or whatever. He has written many books on cultural topics, especially in relation to education, so more credibility. He's written about this before. Edmondson is a credible source because he's written about this topic quite often, so he knows a lot about it. So, okay, that could be a little bit better, but you get the idea. Down here we've got timeliness. This essay was written in 2013 and the textbook was published. And the textbook it was published in was updated in 2018. And we need a little bit more explanation here since technically the essay is out of date because it's over 5 years. It's still in the 10-year range, so it's not bad, but we might need a little bit of explanation in there. And last, our annotation. This article is about people doing what they want to do in life, especially in college, instead of what they believe they should do. Edmondson argues that people need to study the subjects they are interested in because it is their life and they are in charge of both their life and their education. The author discusses that it is a poor idea for a person to study something because it will make them money. People must study what they love. Edmondson also discusses how faculty and administrators are not always present in education as they should be, so it is each student's job to ensure they receive an education and learn. Okay, so that's the annotation, that's the summary. It's only 4 sentences. Again, depending on the instructor, they might want an annotation that's longer. Now let's go down to the paragraph form. It has many of the same ideas, but the organization, I changed it around a little bit and I added some things. If you are assigned the paragraph form, you can start out with this outline, this list form. It can be a good way just to get your ideas down. I thought it was really easy to just take all of this here and reorganize it a little bit and just put it all together instead of having to sit down and write this page all by myself. I kind of had a little bit of help from an outline. So that's something you can do as well. If you cannot use the list form and you have to use paragraph form, you could use the list as your pre-writing and then move over to this here. When I was in college and I was assigned annotated bibliographies, I didn't know what to do, to be completely honest. I wasn't sure where to start. So I think if I had seen something like this, it would have helped me a lot. And that's why I use it in my classes, because I know it would have helped me. Okay, so this first part here, still going to have the MLA citation as it says. Now, this is not going to be in there. This is just for you to see. MLA citation. The first paragraph is about the writer's credibility. I combined everything about the writer that made him credible down into here. This next paragraph I combined to be the piece of work's credibility, the text's credibility, the textbook's credibility, and the publisher's credibility. Anything about that, when it was published, etc. Now I did add something right here. This was about the date. I said the essay was written in 2013 and the textbook it was published in was updated in 2018, so it's still relevant because although it was written more than 5 years ago, the textbook publishers checked it for relevancy only 2 years ago. So kind of using those textbook publishers as extra credibility. And then I added this sentence here. In addition, Edmondson writes about education in this piece, and the education topics he focuses on in this article have not changed significantly in the last 10 years. So yes, education has changed, but the things that he's focusing on, I'm saying it hasn't changed. So it doesn't necessarily matter that this piece was written in 2013. The third paragraph here is going to be my annotation summary. Sometimes instructors like that to be the very first thing. I kind of like writing about the author and the piece first and building that credibility though. So there's my summary there. And then the last part, this is how I'm going to use it. The applicability, in other words. So overall, annotated bibliographies can be quite a bit of work, but you can use some tricks such as using the list format to make it easier. Look at examples, try to use the first one you've written to help you write the second one, and write the third one and the fourth one and so on. And, don't be afraid to take breaks as you're working through this. You might be doing research and you find a really good article that you want to use, and so you make sure that you put it here in your annotated bibliography. You do all this, then you go back to your research, So if this gets kind of grueling and boring, make sure you take breaks, switch tasks, go work on something else. It could be for this class, could be for another class, could be something you got to do around the house, so take breaks. I always advise, on big projects like this. All right, and that's going to be it. Thanks for watching.